Hello everyone, welcome back. I want to talk a little bit more today about doing some work on index cards, but specifically using Copic markers along with Fineliners. Because if you mix the two, this is a set of cards from 2019. In these cards I did portraits in black and white, and used Copic markers around them. So the amount of Copic is a little bit different on each one, but it was the same process. I wasn't using a lot of Copic in the actual portrait, but this year I might be using a little bit more. It just depends. And what you don't want to have happen is to spend all your time drawing your portrait or drawing your apple or your house or your coffee mug or whatever you might draw in a black pen, and then do all of your Copic work and have your ink smear or have it bleed or have it feather. So you don't want to risk the Copic reactivating your ink and causing a problem. So I am going to do a little bit of testing. I have done this in the past. It's always a consideration when you decide to work with Copic and pen and ink. You have to figure out what kind of pen you can use, what will be reliable. Now, the Index Card a Day Challenge runs through June and July. It's commonly called ICAD, and it is run by the Daisy Yellow site. So it is a challenge all of its own, and I tend to do a series on index card. It's one card a day, whatever you want to do. So I've used these kinds of cards before. These are tabbed cards by Smeed, and they're very thick. When I started working with Copic, though, I didn't want the manilla. So I switched over to a really heavyweight white, that actually has a sketch on the back, a heavyweight white index card. And I've been really happy with these. They're very bright white. You can see they are very different from the manilla. So the tone is totally different when you apply color to manilla versus white. You can also use regular index cards for this challenge. My cards are 4x6. You can use 3x5. A lot of people do their cards on basic index cards that you can get at any office supply store or even your grocery store, your corner store. You can use the lined side as part of your card if you want. You can use the white side if it has a white side. Sometimes you will find regular index cards that are just blank. So it's up to you what you choose, but you do want to figure out how your pens or whatever you're going to use will work on that surface. So I'm going to test today to see, just to make sure that whatever I choose, I don't know this year what I'll use. Some years I use fountain pen. Some years I've used Uni-Pin or Pitt Pen. And then one year I used Micron. But I tend to be consistent. Whatever I start out with for my black and white is what I will probably use for most of the series. And I just want to make sure that I don't have a problem with the Copic. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do this year, but I want to make sure that I don't run into bleeding, run into the smudginess. You notice it. If you put color over black lines and the ink starts to bleed, it makes it muddy. And it's really frustrating when that happens. I know that in the past I've had pens that didn't work well with the Copics. I've done a little bit of preliminary testing for today, and I'm not seeing quite as big of a problem. That could be related to the type of card I'm using. I don't know. I was going to test on manilla as well, but I might not. I might do just a little bit of testing on just a plain index card as well as this thicker card. But it's a common question. What kind of fineliner can I use with Copic and not run into a problem? So I debated about how to do this. I sort of wanted to do one card with my 4 top choices, which would be my fountain pen, and this happens to be a TWSBI. I tend to draw with a Lamy, but this has the right ink in it. So this is carbon black, platinum carbon black. So that would be one of my choices. Micron would be one, and I'm going to test with an 05. I tend to draw with an 01, but I don't want to use up my pen today, so I'm going to use the 05. And both of these are always solid choices. The Pitt S and the Uni-Pin in any number, but this is a 0.3. So I'm going to test for sure with these 4, and I might do an extended or larger test with these 4, but I also want to just do a quick test with some other random black pens, Fineliner choices, and some non-Fineliners, some that I sometimes use to fill in larger areas of black. So that's also an issue for me. If I'm filling in a whole big area of black, maybe not big enough to use a Copic brush black, I sometimes use something like this, a Zebra or a Pentel. So I'm going to test those. The others that are just random, I've got a Staedtler. This is a Pigment liner. And this one's also Staedtler Triplus Fineliner. This is just a Zig. And then I do have a Copic multiliner. I'm not going to do that as one of my primary tests. I probably am not going to go to the expense to buy these. Obviously, if you want to just use Copic and want to buy all Copic multiliners, you can. I have always found it to be a slightly drier tip experience. So I will test it, but I'm not going to do it as a primary. It's not one of my top picks for this year, at least. So what I think I'll do first is write out all of these on one card, and then I'm going to put several different kinds of markings down that will let me see how the Copic reacts with one layer of black, or with some cross-hatched areas, or with some solid areas. And then I also noticed a difference depending on what kind of Copic you use. And there is a third kind, but this is a Copic Sketch, and this is a Copic Ciao. Same ink. There is a Copic Classic, and I don't use those. But so the Copic Sketch has one end that is a chisel, and one end that is a brush. And same with the Ciao, Copic Ciao. One end is a chisel, so it says it's a medium broad, and one end is a what they call a super brush. The tips are replaceable on Copics. I almost always use, I would say I always use the brush, always. But I noticed just in some of my testing, I was just curious, and I noticed that the ink didn't always react quite the same with the chisel. The chisel was a little harder on the black lines. So I'm going to show just one pass with a chisel compared to everything else, but all my other tests will be the brush. So that's my plan. Okay, so first I will just randomly, I'm going to start with the Uni-Pin. And I have always really liked these. I used these for several years in a row. So, write what it is. And then I think I will do one box of single hatching, because I do portraits, I do a lot of hatching. So I'll do one box of cross hatching. I'm going to do a little spiral type shape here because when the ink mixes, this would let me see what might happen with a lot of close line work. It's very similar to the hatching. Then I am going to do one filled in area. I'm just going to do a circle. I also know that sometimes there's a difference between how my Copics work with black with different colors versus yellow specifically. So I'm going to do a second box here that's just a single hatch. Actually, I'll do a double hatch here, just a cross hatch. For yellow, then I am going to do a set of lines here that I'm going to just pull down as a test between chisel and brush. And then I thought I might do one other little thing here. Might regret all these dots, but that I layer 2 Copic colors. So that'll be my approach to all the markers that I am going to test, all the Fineliners I'm going to test. This is the Pitt Pen. This is a Pitt S. For many, 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 many years, this was the pen that I used. And it may turn out today that we don't see any difference at all. And that will be a surprise, but it could be something about this card. Obviously, what happens will vary with the kind of paper you use. So if you're drawing in a sketchbook or a journal or on marker paper, you might have a completely different experience. That's the Pitt. Micron, this is what I used last year, although a finer tip. So this is an 05. The tip is different, but the ink is obviously the same as one of the others. I might use the 01, for example. This is fountain pen with platinum carbon ink. So we'll just put platinum. Now, you can also see that this might not be a great choice on this card. It feathers a little bit. So with this card and this pen specifically, I probably wouldn't use this. This would be way too fat for me. But I still want to see how that will react, because I could always put the same ink in a different pen, even in something like a Preppy, which would have a finer nib if you use the 02. My preference would be probably to use fountain pen, but I could always use dip pen, but I think that would feather a lot on these cards. Okay, so that's fountain pen. So those are the 4 that are my primary contenders, although I may have just ruled out one of these just because it's a little too thick, and there's just a little bit of feathering. Actually, there's quite a bit of feathering happening on this card with that pen, so that would not work for me for portraits. So if we do these others, this is the Copic multiliner. This is the 0.5. So we'll just write down what it is. Copic multiliner. This is a Staedtler pigment liner. It's a 0.1. It does have a nice fine tip. Probably don't need to test this one really, but since it's out, go ahead and do it. Of all of them, this one probably is the one that will bleed. So this is a Triplus. And I didn't go buy any special pens. I just went and rummaged through pens I have. But partly I wanted to see what will work best, what I want to avoid, and then I'll decide if I need something for this year. This is a Zig. I found a few of these, so it's something you might also have. This is a very fine one. It's an 005. My tip looks like it's almost disappeared here, but it still writes. So the one thing you would want to make sure you do is let your black dry for 5 to 10 minutes, no matter what you use. It's probably a good idea. So both of these, like I said, are slightly different. I use these, especially when I do graphic novel kinds of things for backgrounds and fill-in. But sometimes on my cards, I need that same kind of fill-in. It can be hard to fill some of these in with a Pitt Pen S, for example, and the Copic black is going to be too thick for me to do this. But I also sometimes draw these little patterns. Even if I'm going to go back and use Copic, I still draw in the patterns. So this is a good example too. This kind of line work might happen on top of the Copic, or the line work might happen and the Copic might happen second. So I also want to test that with each of these pens, or at least with these 4. So this one is a zebra. I can't remember what these are called. As you can see, they're very thick, and this would really be for fill-in. So I really only need to see what it's going to look like with these really thicker lines. I wouldn't be doing the primary fine line work. All right, and one more. This one's very similar. It's a Pentel. And same thing, I only need to know about the thick ones. And then while that dries, I think I will go ahead and just put down a little square. I didn't leave room on the far side, but we'll just do it right here. Just put down a little bit that we can then go back into and just draw some lines on top of with each of these after this little chunk dries. Like I said, yellow tends to be the one that I know has the most trouble, but I'm not only going to test with yellow because I don't think that that same problem extends to all the colors. So I decided that it'd be just as good to see how it worked with a regular color and then figure out what to do about yellow. So we'll let all of that dry for just a few minutes. Okay, so everything has had a few minutes or more to dry. And now we want to test with Copic. I'm going to test with a lavender first. This is V04 Lilac. And then in this column right here, I'm going to test with yellow just to see if there's any difference. When you use Copic, oftentimes you work in circular motions. Since I tend to just be working in a background and filling in, I may or may not do that. Sometimes I'm just doing swipes. So there are a couple ways you could do this. You could really do circular motions, or you could swipe it. I want to just try and be relatively consistent. So I think for maybe the first 3, I will just do swipes, and maybe for the circle one here, I'll do a circular motion. So I'm going to just go over each of my swatch areas. This was Uni-Pin, and I'm going over it. And you can see there's no bleeding, no lifting, no movement of that black ink, which is really good to see. So let's try the others. Let's go across the Pitt. No movement. Micron. It's interesting because if you Google and search, you will find Lots of discussion about this because people always want to know what fineliners will work with their Copics. Because Copics are alcohol markers, you might get concerned about whether this or that kind of fineliner will work. Some fineliners are pigment based, some are India ink, some of them are waterproof, and some are not. So this kind of testing can be really important, but this is looking like most of these would work just fine. So far, there's no bleeding from any of these. This is the Copic I'm going over now. This is the Staedtler, which I think will be fine. I think it's the next one which might bleed. Surprisingly, that looks okay. And then down here on these, we'll just, and surprisingly, those look okay too. So this test right here, I'm just going to come, I think I'll just do a little bit across the middle of each with the brush tip first. And then I just want to check with the chisel. I'm going to angle it a little bit. And I'm going to scrub it just a little bit because I think the scrubbing motion, I had noticed on a different paper that my chisel did bleed, even when the brush tip didn't. Now I'm not seeing any signs of bleeding here. Okay. So nothing really caused a problem. Everything looks okay. If anything, this one, it looks like it does have some lift. There's a little bit of change happening there, but that is really the only one. The platinum, that feathering happened when I drew those, when I did the swatching. Nothing else seems to really have changed, which is a bit surprising. And you might think, well, then what is the point of this? Well, this is actually not a bad outcome. This shows me that I might be able to just pick which one I want to use. So let's try with the yellow. And if I'd done the whole card in yellow, we might have seen something different happen, but let's just try. Have a couple yellows here. I hate to use my yellow. I think I'm almost out of yellow. This is Y08, which is acid yellow. So let's just see what happens. We go across. Let's see, there's a little bit, got a little bit of tinge there. I am just going to touch, my tip to a plain piece here so I don't carry anything over. You can see in the pit, looks like a little bit of lift because this yellow down here at the bottom looks a little muddy. And down here, this Triplus that I expected might have trouble, it also is a little muddy. You can see the yellow is a little dingy. So a little bit of it happening at the bottom of this swatch too. The Uni-Pin looks fine. The Micron looks fine. That platinum ink looks fine. The Copic looks fine. Both of these have a little bit of lift. Okay, so to try blending colors, let's see. Let's do a different color. Let's see. We're going to do a little bit on this row down here. This is RV52, which is cotton candy. And I'm just going to go over each one. Already there's lift on that. That's the Pitt. So definitely seeing some lift off the Pitt. Didn't see it with the purple. So you may find that different colors may react a little bit differently other than just yellow. This one, see, definitely got lift there. You can tell the pink looks a little gray. And yeah, right here we would expect it for that one as well. So the next one is the zig. And then both of these seem okay. I want to see if layering has any additional effect. So we've already gone over it with one color of Copic, and this is Y17 golden yellow. So let's just put down a little bit of another color, maybe just half. Okay, again, the Pitt Pen definitely has a lot of lift. Because when you work with Copics, part of what you're doing is layering. Now you can see how muddy this is getting. You definitely wouldn't want to use that, and you wouldn't want to use that. And I don't think you would anyway, but you might have them. Zig, spine. That just lifted. That's got a little bit of lift, but the Pentel does not. So the zebra's a little dingy. It lifted a little. These two are the worst. And the Pitt Pen definitely has grayed a little bit. All right, and the final thing to look at, and given that everything performed pretty well, I'm not going to do a bigger swatch like I thought I might. But I am going to go just right on top of each of these quickly. So this is Pitt. It might not be in order, but this is Pitt. So if I go on top of it, it looks fine. So if you can manage to work in an order which allows you to put your Copic down first, you may not have as much of a problem. But if you're going to draw first and then go over it, it might depend on what kind of colors you're using. This is the Uni-Pin. I don't think any of them will have a problem going down on top, but it lets you see how well they will show up. So it's the Micron. This is the fountain pen with the platinum carbon. Okay, so comedy of errors. Everything keeps running out of storage space or battery. But we've swatched everything now, and again, surprisingly, most of these did really well. Way better than I expected. I do know that I have had trouble with yellow, and from this test, the only one that I for sure, other than this Staedtler, so I won't use those. The next one I might not use would be Pitt. I see a little bit there. I am a huge fan of Pitt pens, but I wouldn't want to risk it because I do like to use yellow. I like to use yellow. So if I draw this line right here and then put yellow down, I don't want the black to dirty or dingy the yellow. I don't want it to smudge and smear. So I have to be really careful about what I pick. Same with a peach, might do the same as this light color I used here. So that's why I'm doing this. And if I wanted to come in and work inside of the portrait where there's much more ink work, I definitely want to make sure that whatever I put down doesn't cause a problem. So I wouldn't want to use Pitt. But I could use the Uni-Pin if I really wanted to. I definitely could use the Micron. Of course, I could use the Copic. Definitely use that. I would have to have a finer tipped one than I have, but don't think I need to worry about that really. I don't have any other zigs. That was just on hand. Glad to see that both of these worked pretty well. I thought one of them was a little dingy when I looked at it. Actually, if we had a magnifying glass here, we could probably see, I think the zebra may have a little bit of little bit of spread happening from the black dots. So given that, I would be better off if I needed to do some large areas that might come in contact with the Copic, better off using the Pentel, which is also very good to know. I think I have a couple of the zebra. So it's good to know. Good, it's handy. You know, I could definitely have tested all of these on here. Let's just see. We'll just do two of them. This is Uni-Pin. And if we just did a few strokes. And we compare it maybe to the Micron. I'm just curious on this paper if we'll see a difference. So let's just put another one down here for a yellow. And ideally, we would want to let this dry. Maybe the key, this dried longer than 5 minutes, longer than 10 maybe, because I needed to copy and move some files to be able to finish. So if you can let your work dry between the inking and the Copic, probably going to have better luck anyway. I mean, you definitely see the ones that did get dingy, especially in the yellow. You just don't see it as much in the purple swatch. See it a little bit over here in this light pink. So let's see. Let's just see what happens. We'll use this one again. I mean, it hasn't been that long. Does that look like it got a little dingy? Maybe. Maybe. Let's see what happens with the yellow. That's the Micron. I don't expect it to get dingy, but it looks a little dingy. Let's put this down first. That looks safe. That looks safe. Can't tell for sure. I might have to try that again. But I didn't wait a full 5 minutes at all. So I think for sure one of my takeaways is to make sure you are able to wait the 5 to 10 minutes. But otherwise, I hope this was helpful. I hope if you are getting ready to do a project where you use Copic pens with black Fineliners of any sort, that this was useful to you. And if you run into colors that are for sure colors that cause a problem, I'd love to know. Love to know which colors are really good to use to test. I do know that yellows are an issue, and both shades of yellow I used caused the same issue. This lighter one caused an issue. So it's still really helpful, and I'm actually really happy to know that there are several choices here I could make. So thanks for watching. If you're doing ICAD, I hope you follow along on Instagram, the OAmy account, and follow the podcast at Creativity Matters Podcast at Instagram and on the website. And I hope you check out the flip through of prior ICAD years. Have a great time. Have fun making art.